So file input output, or file I/O as it's more commonly known as, is the idea of saving and loading data used for a program. Now, that data could represent any number of things. It might be data that the user needs. For example, it might be a Word file, a document that the user created, or something along those lines. Or it could be something much more program specific, such as like settings that the user has set up or something like that. So the user may not actually have access to change, modify, or use that data in any way, shape, or form other than the idea of changing their settings. So every time the program loads, it finds that file, loads it up, and applies all the settings that the user's chosen, even though the user didn't actually manually do all that work at any one time. So that's the purpose between the purpose of file I/O. So how do we actually do it? Well, there's a lot of different strategies to go about it, and depending on what language you're working in, you may come up with different results. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the most basic form of file I/O, and that's the idea of saving text files. There are other ways, but we're not going to discuss that in these videos, just to keep things simple as they are right now. So before we get into this, what you need to do is think about what your file is going to be used for. So for example, you might have a file that represents like a high score or something like that. So let me just let me draw a quick little picture here. So let's say I have a document, and think of it like a Word or a text document. It's an amazing thing there. And in this one, maybe I'm going to use it for like a high scoreboard for a video game. It doesn't have to be that, but in this case, that's what I'm going to do. And basically what I want to do is I have to design what this file is going to look like. What is it going to be laid out as? I need to know specifically where each piece of data is and how it's set up. And the reason being is that I need to be able to read it back in later. I need to be able to get the data from the file later on. So I need to be specific. So for example, I might do something like this. Let's say I have a top 5 scoreboard, and one layout might look something like this, where you have the first, like the highest score's name. So maybe let's just say name 1 for now, and then right after that we have score 1, and maybe below that we have name 2, and then score 2, so on and so forth. Name 3, score 3. Name 4 and score 4, and name 5 and score 5. Now of course you would actually have real data. So for example, you might have like Bob and 10,432 or something like that. This is just generic to show you. So that might be the way your file is laid out. Alternatively, you could have a completely different layout. Let's draw another rectangle on here just to demonstrate that. So over here, let me just draw another one. Hopefully it basically comes out to the same thing, give or take. Good enough. And on this one, maybe it's not laid out like that, where every row of data is its own isolated piece of information. Maybe you're going to keep everything on the same line. So for example, you might have like name 1, comma, score 1. Oops. And then name 2, comma, score 2, and name 3, comma, score 3, name 4, comma, score 4, and finally name 5, comma, score 5. Oops. The truth is, it doesn't matter which one you choose as long as you're consistent. You are the designer of this file. You have to decide how this is going to be laid out. For example, maybe you're not using this for like loading and saving high scores. Maybe you're doing something a little bit more complex. Maybe you're doing something like saving the game state of like a role-playing game or something crazy like that. Well, that didn't lock off, but that's okay. And inside of here, you might have like all sorts of data. You might have like the player's name. Oops. And then you might have like their level. You might have something like a list of items for their inventories. You might have like item 1, item 2, item 3, and so on and so forth. And then below that, maybe you have all their different statistics. Maybe their height, their weight, their what else do we have in these games? Things like this. Their dexterity, their strength, and all these different things. You can keep going on and on and on. You might even get into more precise things like where they're located in the world, like location, how much money they have, all these different things, experience points. I can go on forever and ever and ever. And whenever the player loads up their game, it just goes through, reads in all of this data, and stores it back in variables. So it takes it from the text file and puts it back in the variables. And when the player saves their game, it reads it from the variables and then puts it back in the text file, back in the exact same locations. That way, the next time you go to load it again, the next time you go to read it, you know exactly where that data is and how it's laid out. It's up to you to design this, and that is the most important and sometimes the most challenging part about doing file input-output. So in the next videos, we're going to start to learn a little bit of the finer nuances specific to languages.